Dead Rising is a bizarre oddity of a game that you wouldn't have thought would get as big as it did. It's an experimental fever dream, and that's exactly why I love it. And despite its weirdness and occasional jank, it earned enough of a following to spawn a few sequels that I never got around to playing, and some shit movies I've caught bits of. Descriptions to the game will usually call Dead Rising a horror sandbox, which seems like an accurate description since the main point of the game is using a shopping mall as your own personal armory, and using zombies to test the durability of gardening tools. Originally released in 2006 for the Xbox 360, Dead Rising is a game about surviving in a zombie-infested shopping mall while you try and piece together a conspiracy. You play as Frank West, photojournalist and dad bod owner, as he charters a private helicopter to hop the military quarantine surrounding the fictional town of Willamette, Colorado, as he aims to find out what's going on and escape with the story before your pilot returns to pick you up in 3 days. Most of the game is spent running around the mall twatting zombies with whatever shite you can find in the shops, while trying your hardest to get to each quest on time, or as the game calls them, scoops. Even if you've only heard about the game and haven't played it yourself, you probably know about the game's time limit. That bit about the helicopter returning in 3 days isn't a plot device that just sits in the background while the game bends time around how long you take to do stuff. You know that thing movies do where one of the characters tells the protagonist that they only have a minute to do something, and the resulting scene spans much longer than a minute while they try and defuse the bomb or whatever? No, when this game says you have 3 days to finish the game, you have 3 days to finish the game. Now that isn't completely true, as each minute in game is only about a few seconds real time, and there is stuff for you to do after the 3-day time period is over. What this means is that both the main and side scoops that the game has are also time sensitive to that 3-day period. So if you don't finish a scoop before its available time slot is done, then it's gone forever, or at least until you start another save. So if you fail to finish one in time, then you fail the main quest. But you don't get a game over for it. You can go right on playing even if you failed the first main scoop and just dick around for 3 days. In fact, you actually have to fail the main quest in order to get some of the game's 6 different endings. I know there are people out there that hate this kind of stuff, and I completely understand because I'm one of them usually. Anytime a game rushes you to finish something before you can do anything else, it stops you from enjoying it at your own pace, and you start feeling guilty for getting interested in side content because you've got this fictional deadline hanging over your head. Like if it's a time trial in a racing game or a section where a bomb is about to go off, then yeah, a time limit makes sense, but when the whole game is a time limit, the game stops being about fun and starts being about dread. The same type of dread you feel when you're behind on an assignment, or getting close to a deadline at work. But with Dead Rising, I don't get that, and that's because it helps the game's RPG leveling system, and the fact that this game is made for replaying rather than blasting through it in one sitting, although you can still do that if you know what you're doing. As far as the basic gameplay goes, Dead Rising is a third-person RPG Pokemon Snap game, where the focus of the fighting isn't so much about getting better and upgrading your weapons to fight stronger mobs, but exploring them all and learning where all the power weapons are so you can run over to them at the start of each day, and hoard them to go deal with whatever backyard militia rejects you have to fight this time round. The main story of the game though is obviously the zombies, and yeah, there's a lot of them. It's still impressive just how many of them the game can have on the screen at any one time, but unlike something like Resident Evil, these zombies don't have any special mutations. They're just pure Romero zombies that shuffle around and eat people. They're pretty weak and can go down in a couple of hits from a 2x4. They're more like a persistent obstacle than an enemy. They're just a massive horde that you have to push your way through to go and deal with the more important shit on the other side. You can always take them out with melee weapons, but weapons degrade over time, and you might not want to waste a weapon's durability on standard zombies if you need it for a boss, and the number of items that you can carry at any one time is limited, though this does increase with every few levels. But with the amount of zombies there are, it's not exactly quick or effective to kill them all. They'll just keep spawning more. You could always run around them, but the way that the AI is placed and moves around means you will eventually hit a horde that's so dense that you can't get around it. You just have to go through it. Eventually unlock some crowd surfing moves like jumping onto a zombie's shoulders and the jump kick, but you could end up falling into the middle of a horde that way. So while one zombie on its own or a couple isn't a problem, the more that turn up, the spicier the situation might get. Especially if you're trying to keep some brain-dead survivors alive, but we'll get to those fuckers later. They do gain a mild buff at midnight because they work on gremlin logic apparently, but it's that minor that you won't really notice much of a difference beside the fact that they have glowing eyes now. That isn't to say there's absolutely no difference in the type of zombies that you can fight though, as each character model has attributes related to the type of outfit they're wearing or their body type. For example, if a zombie is the one model with a Hawaiian shirt on, it's always carrying a knife that you can steal for some reason. Cop zombies are usually either carrying a nightstick or a gun depending on what part of the mall you're in, and take a bit more damage. Construction zombies wearing hard hats can take a hit to the head without taking damage. Any zombie with a female character model will almost always try and bite Frank's dick off if they grapple him. I didn't make that bit up, that is in the wiki. The blokes don't have that animation. Combat isn't exactly complex. You only have 3 attacks and those are just a light swing with whatever you're carrying, a kick and spitting, but as you level up you unlock more moves. It gets to the point where by the end of the game you basically have a fighting game combo list of shit you can do. Most of the early ones are just crowd surfing control moves like jump kick and zombie riding, but for whatever reason the rest of the moves are all wrestling moves and it's fucking amazing. There's lifts, throws, a roundhouse kick, a fucking suplex. It's hilarious, and the best part about it is that you aren't restricted to zombies when using them. You can use them on human characters as well. The highest level moves allow you to barehandedly disembowel a fucker and decapitate someone with your foot, with the very last move being a kind of shitty zombie blend move that isn't really worth it. Weapons are specific to each area of the mall, so while you might find loads of useful weapons in a hardware store or an antique shop, you won't exactly find anything fit to use as a weapon in a clothes shop, besides being able to disable a single zombie with a coat hanger. You might think a food court or a supermarket would be pretty useless as well, but food items are actually pretty vital if you want to make it through some of the tougher fights without dying, as they replenish health. Their effectiveness is a little odd though, and depends on whatever arbitrary number of health points the developers have decided each item should give back. So while raw dogging a whole baguette might only give you 1 point of health, items like orange juice and wine give you 4 to 5, with the most powerful healing item in the game being a well done steak if you can be asked to cook it, and the means to cook it might not always be available to you. The risk you take with healing items though is that they take up an inventory space, which means that you'll have to sacrifice a potential weapon slot to carry more healing items and vice versa. Food items also allow you to craft stat buff protein shake looking things if you put 2 items in a blender, which can do things like increase Frank's movement speed for a short time, make him invincible, and upgrade the useless spit ability so that Frank can spit fireballs for a short time. You can also fuck up the recipe and create what's called a randomizer drink, which will give Frank some health back but also make him shit himself. The number of potential combinations for food items to create these drinks is that extensive that the Dead Rising wiki has a spreadsheet to make it easier to figure out what items make what. In addition to food items, you can also gain stat buffs from carrying around books, which are found in several shops throughout the mall. Usually the title of these books gives you a bit of a hint on what stat they boost, so carrying something around like a healthy lifestyle magazine will make healing items more effective. But there's also some weird shit like the Japanese phrase book, which is used exactly once so you can talk to some Japanese survivors, or the skateboard and bicycle books, which on top of making you stay on them longer also allows you to do tricks. Pretty much all the melee weapons are fun to use, and there's around 141 weapons in total. Weapons will vary in usefulness though, with some of them either doing no damage at all or so little damage that they might as well do nothing, and most of the high damage weapons tend to not last as long as some of the shittier ones. So it's sometimes useful to carry a high durability weapon that stuns zombies or knocks them down to get through crowds. For a personal favourite, I'd have to go with the mannequin torso. It's quick, has high durability, and Frank wields it by the gooch. Plus there's always mannequins that spawn in the storage room as you head down into the mall from security, so I'd usually stock up on them before each run, though obviously it's more for zombie clearing. You aren't going to take down a psychopath with it, which is where the power weapons and guns come in. I'll be honest and say I don't like the guns in Dead Rising. Aiming is sticky and awkward and you'll have to stand in order to fire, but outside of boss fights where you need guns yourself to even hit them, they aren't really useful for hordes or zombies since standing still in a large horde isn't a good idea, especially when melee weapons hit in a large arc and auto-target, making the process a whole lot faster. Guns are fairly rare as well, with the most that you'll find early game being a pistol or two, unless you want to take on probably the hardest and most annoying boss fight in the game by clearing out the gun store. Or you could just wait until after the scoop chance and walk in with no problems, but overall I'd say that it isn't really worth it, since most bosses can be killed with a chainsaw and guns aren't particularly useful against zombies, unless you're using the shotgun, which makes sense. I will say that if you use the hunting rifle on a zombie, you'll get probably one of the most satisfying headshots in a game since Resident Evil 4, though this one doesn't have a chance of ruining your day. Shops are also useful for customizing Frank, since you can pull clothes from any stores that carry them, though I would prefer if the outfit you got was related to the outfit that you're looking at on the shelf. You'll usually approach the shelf and pick something, and either that item won't be represented on the shelf, or you'll pick something out of a group of things, so it can be confusing when you're trying to get something specific. Clothing serves no gain gameplay wise, but I'd argue that the most important part of the game is making Frank look as fucked as possible.
Can't really blame her for running from a guy with your looks.
There's a pretty good variety of clothes, from the regular stuff like suits and sportswear to ill-fitting children's clothing, which Frank awkwardly fits himself into, making him look like someone who needs their hard drive checking. And yes, there are fedoras, meaning you can become a literal mall ninja. There's also a few unlockable outfits and weapons, and yes, you can unlock a Mega Man outfit, complete with a functional Mega Buster. Given that the game was published by Capcom, there's actually a fair few Mega Man nods throughout the game, though strangely enough no Resident Evil stuff, which is odd. I kind of feel like that would have been perfect. There's also a few outfits that were released as downloadable content on the Xbox Live Marketplace for free, which I think are just included on the PC version as is, though to be honest they're all kind of shit since they're just various types of formal wear. The game has you running back and forth through the mall all the time, so over the course of the game you start to get to know where all the most useful shops are, and can draw a mental map to make sure that you pass by each one of them on the way to the next scoop, because you are all but useless against a sizable number of zombies if you're underleveled and barehanded. As you play, you'll unlock new areas of the mall and find shortcuts which help to cut your travel time down. One early shortcut, which is vital to making transporting survivors less of a headache, is the hidden shortcut behind the mirror in the women's toilets in Paradise Plaza, which will take you straight across the park to Wonderland Plaza. To get this, you'll have to fight an optional boss which this game calls psychopaths, which come in two flavours. The first one is mandatory boss fights that you have to do in order to progress the story, and the other is optional boss fights with survivors that have either completely lost it or are using the zombie outbreak as an excuse to act a cunt. In this case, you have to fight a manic clown that juggles chainsaws in order to rescue the guy he has strapped to a roller coaster to learn where the shortcut is, but doing this will also give you access to said chainsaw, which is hands down one of, if not the best melee weapons in the game. Because like the items in the shops, if you drop a boss weapon or leave it in the area it spawned in, it'll spawn right back where you killed the boss, allowing you to go on a whistle-stop tour of all the available power weapons after you've killed each boss, which does break the game a little, since when you're leveled up a bit and have a mini chainsaw, most of the boss fights end up being a piece of piss. Overall, the psychopath fights are all really memorable and bizarre, like fighting a deranged general manager that's become so attached to his supermarket that he views any survivors as vandals and chases you down with a modified shopping cart. Or a Vietnam War veteran that's flashed back and thinks you're a Viet Cong soldier, who is also voiced by Steve Bloom. That last one actually gets pretty tragic, which comes out of left field when all the other boss fights in this game are over-the-top caricatures of something. I mean, you've got the obvious zombie movie survivor types, like a gruff vet and a prepper father and his family, but then you've got Paul Blart's creepy older sister.
Let's see just how shameless you are, you dirty little skank. Say hello to my little friend.
They're all just a little strange, and for the most part, fun to fight, despite the combat not really being all that exciting when it comes to boss arenas. The combat lends itself more to crowd-clearing zombies than it does individual boss fights, which can make these fights feel a little bit awkward. The convicts can get fucked though. There's a park in the middle of the mall that you have to walk across if you don't know the toilet shortcut yet, or if you don't have maintenance access. The park is home to a group of escaped convicts in a jeep with a mounted gun on it. Getting past them is a dice roll because 9 times out of 10 their AI will fuck up and they'll spend the whole time ramming into a tree. But every once in a while they'll clip you, and if you're escorting survivors this can get annoying. What's worse is that you can't just kill them. I mean, you can kill them, but there's a catch. If you kill them, you'll be able to use the jeep for a bit, but it'll despawn the minute you leave the area. Not only that, but the fucking convicts will respawn after a while. There is no other psychopath that does this. Only the convicts. To add insult to injury, the music that accompanies them is the song Gone Guru by a group called Lifeseeker, which wouldn't be a problem normally, but you have to cut across the park a lot, so every time you do it, you'll hear the song repeat. But cutting across the park doesn't take that long, so I am far too familiar with the opening riff of that song.
One time is funny, 2 times is fucking annoying, no?
Getting back to how the game starts, after a brief tutorial on how to use the camera, the military show up to harass Frank's helicopter, because yeah, why wouldn't they? This opening always bothered me because both Frank and the pilot seemed surprised the military would notice a loud fucking helicopter going overhead that wasn't one of theirs. So in a rush, Frank jumps out onto the rooftop and you now have 3 days to figure out what's going on, before you have to be back on the helipad by midday on the final day to be picked up. You met on the helipad by a man named Carlito before you wander down into the mall. This man will become important later. This section is more like an extended tutorial that teaches you the basic mechanics of the game, where you can run around and interact with some of the survivors that have barricaded the entrance plaza. I should probably mention the camera at this point. The camera is the game's other mechanic besides twatting zombies. As Frank is a photojournalist, you have a camera around your neck the whole time, and it's not just part of your outfit. Taking pictures in Dead Rising awards you with PP, which stands for Prestige Points, which is basically just XP. You get Prestige Points by completing missions, killing stuff, and taking photographs. The helicopter ride at the start of the game introduces it to you, encouraging you to take pictures of events at just the right moment, like a gas explosion or this helpless woman falling to her death. Yeah, that one's really going to get you the Pulitzer. If you miss the event or you take it too late, you'll be awarded with less prestige than normal, and taking the same photo multiple times will yield less prestige with every shot. But this is just the scripted opening. What about the rest of the game? Well, you can take the camera out and snap a picture at any time, even in the middle of boss fights. In fact, the game actually encourages you to do that with these little photo op icons. Your photo is also graded depending on the genre of the photo that you took as well, with these being broken up into drama, brutality, outtakes, horror, and yes, erotica. You can genuinely level up in this game by taking pictures of survivors' tits. Did I mention this was a Japanese game? Horror is basically just any shot with a large number of zombies in it, which is probably the most common type of shot. You can get a fair amount of prestige by doing this in the starting area by standing on the stairs and taking pictures of the horde, but obviously the more you do it, the less the shot will be worth. Outtakes are anything comedic, because as Romero proves, zombies are weirdly suited to slapstick for some reason. So this basically just means shoving gag items onto zombies' heads. Brutality is anything with a large amount of gore, and drama is usually awarded anytime you take a picture of a survivor doing something. This opening area is full of opportunities to do this, as there's a number of survivors standing around, either scared, injured, or arguing with their wife. So yes, this is probably the only game where you gain XP by taking photos of a domestic. There's even a side quest dedicated to photo taking, where you essentially start a photo war with a rival photographer, which eventually leads to a boss fight. So overall, the photography mechanic is a lot more fleshed out than you'd expect it to be. Unsurprisingly, the barricade doesn't hold, and you have to fight your way to the security room before the door is welded shut. The security room is your safe room for most of the game, and it's where you'll be returning to pretty regularly to drop off survivors, start story missions, and use the save station. Dead Rising uses save points, so you'll You'll either have to use the bench in the security office, the toilets around the mall, prompts after certain story events, or any other designated safe zones. This doesn't sound so bad on paper, but what this does mean is that you'll have to be on the fucking ball with your saves, because it doesn't take much to forget to save after one particularly bad survivor run or a boss fight before you get decked and lose everything. Having save points is nothing new, but Dead Rising also has an interesting continue screen to go with them. When you die, you get two options: load the last save and quit and save. What that last one does is it saves you as dead and kicks you to the title screen, keeping your character progress and wiping your save data. So if you're a new player and click that option by mistake, well, you only do it once. This is on top of the fact that saving is already risky, because if you save for security but you don't realise that you only have a minute to get to the next story mission, and you saved in a bog 2 minutes away from the location, then you can lock yourself out of finishing the game. This is part of the game's approach to its RPG mechanics. It expects you to die a lot and fail the mission, so keeping your character progression makes you feel like you haven't wasted several hours and gotten a failed ending, because the next run will be easier and you'll know where everything is now. I will also say that this is not a particularly long game, so on top of being a cool way to develop your character and see multiple endings, it also pads out the game's runtime a bit but keeps it fun, because you're always unlocking new shit and doing missions that you might not have done in the previous run. The security room is also where you're introduced to two important characters, Brad and Jesse. They allude to being there for some ulterior motive, and they're clearly not civilians, which piques Frank's interest, and you get to be exposed to the full cocky mess that is Frank West. Frank is a bit of a dickhead by design. He spends the whole game shit-talking people, wanking himself off, and trying to quit but coming off as a weird psychopath. Basically, he's convinced that he's Marie Colvin, when in actual fact he's more like Danny DeVito in LA Confidential.
It's Frank. Frank West. Remember that name, because the whole world's gonna know it in 3 days.
You know how to use this?
Kinda. I've covered wars, you know.
I generally like his character and think the voice actor does a good job of getting across his smarmy superiority without making him totally unlikable. Before you leave the security room to explore the mall proper, you'll be introduced to Otis. Otis is like a crazy ex-girlfriend that calls you 200 times, and then when you don't answer, she smashes your window and kills your dog. He's nice enough in person, but he's essentially the game's only quest giver. Because he spends the whole game in the security room, he'll let you know if he sees anything interesting on the monitors, usually giving you scoops for survivors that need rescuing or psychopaths that you can fight. And he does this by calling you on the walkie-talkie he gives you. This doesn't sound so bad until you realise that answering the walkie-talkie forces Frank to bring it up to his ear, stopping you from attacking anything until the call is finished. And Otis isn't voiced, so you have to wait around for the slow-ass text to finish scrolling, or until you get grabbed by the closest zombie, which will end the call, forcing Otis to call you again almost immediately. But the call doesn't just carry on straight away. Oh no, Otis has the sheer fucking gall to waste extra time by telling you that hanging up is rude before getting back to what he was telling you about, extending the call and extending the potential time for you to get grabbed again. And guess what happens if you get grabbed again a second time before the call finishes? Mate, it's not a good time. You might be saying just ignore it, answer it when you get a moment, but there's 3 problems with that solution. 1, ignoring calls will eventually mean that you miss your chance to get directions to the scoop, so the quest is fucked. 2, you almost never get a moment to yourself because of all the fucking zombies. And 3, it takes a while for him to stop calling you. So if you don't answer his call, he will continue to call you again and again and again until you pick up. Although maybe ignoring Otis wouldn't be all bad, because while occasionally he'll call you about story details or direct you to a boss fight, 90% of the time he'll be calling about survivors. Survivors in Dead Rising are people holed up in various places around the mall. Once you get a scoop on one, you have a certain amount of time to go and rescue them before they die. And the game will tell you this by flashing up on the screen to tell you that someone you've never met died on the other side of the mall while you were busy trying on suits. Rescuing survivors means fighting your way over to them and talking to them to try and convince them to come back to the security room. But it's usually not that simple. Most of the time there'll be some kind of roadblock preventing you from taking them with you that you have to sort out first. Once you get past the initial hurdle though, the real struggle begins, because Dead Rising might have some of the worst AI I have ever seen in a fucking game. Leading survivors is like leading a drunk friend back from the pub that's so pissed that they get distracted or fuck up every 2 steps and fall over, so you have to go back and pick them up. You think they're doing okay, and then you look back and they've tripped over a bench or they're arguing with a crackhead. The AI will get stuck on scenery, barge through hordes looking for a fight, and then get grappled so they can't move until you go back and help them. When the coast is completely clear and it should be smooth sailing, they'll occasionally become so fixated on attacking one random zombie that wasn't even a threat, and take so long doing it that the clear path you had through the horde closes, and now you have to keep them alive while the horde descends on you again. And sometimes they will straight up do nothing while every zombie in the room is busy taking chunks off them like a rotisserie chicken. in. The AI straddles the line between taking on more than they can handle or otherwise giving up completely. Even the Dead Rising wiki takes a moment to warn you about how shit the AI is. The wiki itself gives you more pointers on how to make escorting these fucks less tortuous, but it only makes it slightly more bearable. You can issue a move command to them, so telling them to run to a point while you try and deal with the zombies around them is better than having them follow you. But even then, they'll still find ways to get stuck sometimes. Survivors can also get grabbed by zombies, which means you have to go back and help them, and anytime a survivor gets grabbed, they'll spend the whole time yelling at you to come and help them. Which is annoying when you're already in a bit of a situation, and if you leave them for too long, they'll get eaten. And if that wasn't bad enough, there are also survivors that can't even fight that you either have to leave by the hand or carry. These survivors are either injured people or women. Yeah, if you were looking for good female representation, this really isn't the game. Almost every female survivor in this game is useless by design, except for a rare few. You literally have to lead them by the hand, and you can't even give them any weapons. And to top it all off, the hand-holding mechanic is shite. If you turn too hard, you'll lose them and you have to go back, but when you hit the button it snaps your view forward. So instinctively you push forward to flip Frank round, but that sends you spinning around too fast and you let go again. And it also de-equips your weapon because fighting the controls wasn't already infuriating enough. This is strange when you consider the game takes inspiration from Dawn of the Dead, which features a pretty progressive female co-lead for the 70s. I guess while I'm on the subject, I should probably address the Romero in the room. If you couldn't tell, the game is very clearly inspired by the 1978 film Dawn of the Dead, so much so that the copyright holders of Dawn of the Dead filed a lawsuit in 2008, 2 years after the game had already come out, which didn't go anywhere. If you haven't seen it, a group of 4 survivors flee the city and hold up in a deserted shopping mall. The film follows them as they try to survive, using them all to their advantage and ultimately coming under attack from other survivors. I don't pretend to understand legal stuff, but I'd say Dead Rising is definitely different enough to where you couldn't exactly call it a rip-off. Dead Rising tells a pretty different and generally goofier story compared to Dawn of the Dead's more serious takedown of consumerism. Not that Dead Rising doesn't do that as well, it's just that Dead Rising's approach is a lot more heavy-handed. But Dawn of the Dead was more about the character drama that took place between the survivors and showing the apocalypse happening live. Actually, the opening scene of the film is great, because for all the fun gore that the film has, the opening shows what I think is a horrifically accurate depiction of how a response to an apocalypse like this would probably go down. About the first 20 minutes of the film are dedicated to a newsroom that doesn't know what to do anymore and is just staying on the air waiting for the signal to go dead because they can't really think of anything else to do. People are just yelling over each other and giving up on news procedure. People talk over the presenter half the time, and the performances really sell how scared and confused everyone is. Dead Rising, on the other hand, takes the Resident Evil approach, opening with quips and combat roles and evolving into a global conspiracy with G.I. Joe men. So no, I don't think you could reliably call Dead Rising a ripoff, but there's definitely no denying the inspiration. How's the music? Well, depending on how the bots see this video, you might not even hear it, but I'm going to try anyway. So if there are large sections of silence in this video, either now or later, then you know why. Normally I wouldn't worry about this, but Dead Rising uses a lot of licensed music. I want to say that it's probably about 70% of the overall soundtrack, and it's mostly the kind of cheesy metal that you would blast in your Corolla E120 on a burned CD, made up entirely of songs you got off LimeWire. It is a bizarre choice, but it isn't always necessarily metal. The boss fights usually use licensed music, but the game's original soundtrack is a mix of pretty much any style of music you can think of. Basically, the soundtrack doesn't know what it wants to be. This should be a complete mess, but somehow when you match that up with the game's over-the-top presentation, it kind of makes sense. Dead Rising is its own thing, and it does not care if you like it or not. It's kind of hard to cover since there's so much of it and every piece is in a different genre from the last, but I don't think there was any part of the original score that wasn't well put together. The original score was done by, and I'm trying here so sorry if I fuck up the pronunciation, Hideki Okagawa and Marika Suzuki, both of whom have composed music for a shitload of Capcom published games over the years. The Dead Rising wiki even has a list so you can see who did what tracks. Getting back to the story though, Dead Rising's plot isn't exactly anything you haven't heard before. But it is memorable, if only for its kitchen sink approach to a global conspiracy, upping the stakes in the drama to a ludicrous degree while at the same time making as many weird jokes as it can. I'm going to be spoiling pretty much all of the major plot points in the game from here to cover some of the more story-centric missions, so if you want to go in blind, then here's your spoiler warning, and a timestamp.
Take a look out there. If those ain't zombies, what would you call them?
Getting past the tutorial section, you'll follow Brad over to the food court where you'll fight Carlito, the man you saw on the rooftop at the start of the game, although this time he's openly hostile to you instead of giving you foreshadowing. Brad alludes to Carlito having something to do with the zombie situation, so most of the game is spent chasing down Carlito to try and find out why the zombies are here, before time runs out. But you're still kept in the dark about how Carlito is involved. Brad just implies that he is. Brad actually calls Frank out on his bullshit, but Frank couldn't really give a shit. All he wants is the story, so he eventually caves and reveals that both he and Jesse work for Homeland Security, and they're here trying to track down a man in the mall that you saw at the start of the game. But beyond that, you won't really know much more for a while. It turns out that this guy is Dr. Barnaby, and Brad here is here to get him out of Willamette safely, which Frank is able to guarantee because of the helicopter that's coming in 3 days. Though I have to wonder why Frank is always so sure about that. The last he saw of the pilot, he was being chased by military helicopters. I can't imagine they would just let him go after he flew over the quarantine zone containing the zombies that they don't want anyone to know about. I've seen X-Files. That pilot is either getting shot down or transported to a Siberian gulag. A little ways into the game, you'll actually rescue Dr. Barnaby from Carlito and bring him back to the security room. But Brad gets his leg shot up and you need to go and get some medicine, where you'll run into a woman named Isabella. But she runs off after alluding to some shit going down in a town called Santa Cabeza. You'll have to track her down again, but not before she tries to kill you in a motorcycle boss fight that is kind of tedious, but her AI will eventually break and you can keep pot-shotting her. Apparently, several shots from a sniper rifle to the face does nothing to her, and Frank questions her about Santa Cabeza, but she's still vague about it, revealing that she's Carlito's sister, and apparently Carlito is trying to send a message that the zombies were created by the US government, implying that the same thing happened in Santa Cabeza. When you get to head back to the security room, Dr. Barnaby blames the whole thing on Santa Cabeza being the main hub for the Central American drug trade, and that some kind of new drug must be creating the zombies, although it's made pretty obvious that he's lying and that he's just anxious for someone to kill Carlito and get him out of Willamette. You go to meet Isabella at midnight, but she's already been shot by Carlito and passes out, so you have to carry her all the way back to the fucking security room. This isn't nearly as bad as a normal survivor run, as you have Kindell, who is probably the only survivor that doesn't have 2 brain cells, and comes equipped with a shotgun, though he can still be a ball ache sometimes. And yeah, I know you might be bleeding from a gunshot wound, Isabella, but I'm on my last legs here, so you are gonna have to tank those fucking zombies while I drink this orange juice. Brett ends up questioning her about Santa Cabeza, and she says that it has nothing to do with any drug trade, and that the zombies came from an American livestock research facility near the town that was experimenting on some kind of wasp, and that the head of the research project was Dr. Barnaby. Not too long before Dr. Barnaby body slams Jesse and starts turning, but not fast enough to prevent him from launching into exposition. Apparently the intention of the research was to reduce the cost of breeding livestock, but they ended up creating some kind of zombie cattle by accident. He also gives probably one of the best line deliveries in the game while he says this.
That research was absolutely necessary!
It's pretty on the nose, but I generally like the consumerism analogy angle that the game takes. It's not high art or anything, but it's putting in more effort into its story than it needs to. I know it's just doing the same thing that Dawn of the Dead did, but at least it's trying. And I may be wrong, but I don't think I've ever heard of agricultural research being the cause of an outbreak in a zombie movie, so props for originality. Usually it's super soldiers or some shit. And fuck, given that the game came out in 2006, the imagery of zombie livestock wasn't too far out of the public consciousness, at least over here, so maybe they're taking some cues, I don't know. Either way, Brad kills Dr. Barnaby and surmises that Carlito used the zombie outbreak in Willamette to get revenge for what happened in Santa Cabeza. Oh, and there are now cultists in the mall that attack you on sight. So many cultists, in fact, that you wonder where they came from. Was there a compound near the mall that was just ready to go the minute shit went sideways? Either way, you gain 500 XP per head, and I've got a few hours before the next scoop starts, so... If you're like me and you suck at getting to scoops on time, then there will probably be a large portion of time here where you have fuck all to do while you wait for the next main scoop to start. This happens a few times over the course of the game and can be a bit dull since there is no way of speeding up time in this game. So you're essentially left to kill time by dicking around with the zombies. So maybe a mechanic where you could wait in save stations might have been a good addition, at least for people like me that struggle to do things on time. I mean, fuck, this was supposed to be a Halloween video. Carlito starts chatting shit over the tannoy again, and you're now about to enter the worst fucking mission in the entire game. Carlito has rigged them all with explosives which, if they go off, will release the parasitic larvae that causes the zombies into the atmosphere, spreading the zombies outside of Willamette. First, you'll have to run to the maintenance access tunnel if you found the key, and find a car. If you haven't found the key, then you'll have to run through the park and use the motorbike, as it's the only vehicle that you can squeeze through the crash barrier into the underground tunnels. The tunnels are packed wall to wall with zombies, and as you drive through them, you'll slowly lower the health of your vehicle. The bike might actually be the better choice for this, as it's easier to weave through the crowd and avoid damaging it too much. You have to collect 3 of these things, and the tunnels are long, so statistically you will have to replace your vehicle at some point, because the last thing you want to do is to be on foot in the tunnels. If that wasn't already bad enough, Carlito will chase you through the tunnels while you do this and throw pipe bombs at you. Usually he won't follow you to the bomb, as his AI is also kind of fucked, but if he does, have fun trying to open the van doors while he keeps pelting you with explosives and you're surrounded by a shitload of zombies. If you actually manage to drop Carlito, he will at least leave you the fuck alone, but fighting him in the tunnels is not something I would recommend, unless you get lucky and get him stuck on a wall. Brad gets into a John Woo shootout with Carlito and shoots him in that part of the abdomen that people always get shot in movies so they can bleed out and have a dramatic death scene later, but not before Carlito kicks Brad into a darkened section of the tunnels to be eaten by the horde of zombies that are hanging out down there, and Brad dies. You don't know this for definite unless you go looking in the tunnels after the cutscene, which you can miss entirely. After another shitty escort mission, you'll get Isabella back to her old hideout, where she tries to find out what Carlito is planning. But the computer has a password, so she tells you she's going to try and access it while you dick around saving Carlito from Larry Chiang. Larry is a butcher that has started cutting up survivors to presumably eat them. He's not too hard of a boss, but he can grapple you if you're not careful. After you kill him, Carlito will start doing his death scene and launch into a monologue analogy about zombies that is so ham-fisted that it makes Dawn of the Dead seem subtle by comparison.
Aren't zombies great? I mean, all they do is eat, and eat, and eat, growing in number. Just like you good, red, white, and blue Americans.
What are they doing? Why did they come here?
Some kind of instinct, memory of what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
They're still here.
They're after us. They know we're still in here.
They're after the place. They don't know why, they just remember. Remember that they want to be in here.
What the hell are they?
They're us, that's all.
Isabella figures out the password and you'll have officially completed all of the cases, though obviously that isn't much of an ending, so the game just drops this not so subtle but after it congratulates you. Jesse calls the DHS and requests a rescue, but the DHS has decided it's going to ignore any survivors as the government is going to deny the existence of the outbreak, and is sending special forces in to Black Mesa the whole town at midnight. I genuinely like this cutscene where Jesse just calmly takes off her glasses and starts having a full-on breakdown in the corner. It's subtle. The shaky dolly in and the cut to the wide really sell it, and to be fair, I'd probably be feeling the same way. To be honest, all of the cutscenes in Dead Rising are really well done. Usually games will typically treat the cutscenes as secondary to the gameplay, which is fair. A functional game is more important than a nicely shot cutscene, and depending on the size of the team, the person doing the cutscenes might not even really know much about how to shoot a scene. They might just be the guy that was picked to do the cutscenes because, well, somebody had to do them. Obviously there's crossover with stuff like Metal Gear, and it seems like more recently companies are handing off their cutscenes to exterior CG companies. But it's always nice when you see in-game cutscenes where someone obviously knows about composition, pacing, and crossing a line. Stuff like that. I think it's neat anyway. You'll wait around for a bit and you'll get another cutscene around 13 hours before arrival, where special forces show up to escort Jessie out of the security room if she agrees to silence. But I guess Barnaby must have bitten Jessie a few cases ago and she turns and kills the soldiers sent in to find her. If you head back up to the security room, you can actually find her and put her out of her misery with dignity and respect. The security room is now completely empty, you have no immediate cases, and the mall is now full of Special Forces soldiers that are by far the most annoying enemy in the game. Right next to their dinky little toy helicopter drones that have machine guns duct taped to them like something out of a particularly hardcore episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy. But they're not impossible to take down. Bizarrely, the most effective strategy is to use the lift move on them, since you can just use all of the zombie wrestling moves you've learned. It's also just funny. They also get a real Resident Evil vibe from their intro cutscene because of all the shots of dudes in tactical gear bodying zombies. And also the fact that this is a Capcom game, so I guess it makes a lot of sense. Be careful though, because this is where you can fuck yourself if you weren't paying attention like I was. If you get taken down by the Special Forces guys, you won't actually die. You'll lose some time and wake up in the back of a helicopter, forcing you to play this minigame where you have to struggle your way out of the shitty off-brand cable ties they use to handcuff you. But if you fail it and they spot you, you'll take a rifle butt to the chin and lose some more time, which for me meant that I missed the important phone call that Isabella sends you, telling you to meet her at her hideout at 10 PM. So I just ended up waiting around on the helipad for ages like a moron, and then was confused when I got the bad ending. Or ending C as the game calls it. This ending is weird because even if you were standing on the helipad waiting for the timer to go down, it'll cut to a shot of the pilot looking at an empty helipad where he assumes you didn't make it and decides to leave, but gets eaten by a zombie. So the game just decides that you didn't make it to the helipad on time even though you were standing right on it. Alternatively, if you fail the main mission before Special Forces arrive and you get to the helipad on time, Frank will board it with however many survivors you've saved, and you'll presumably escape. But you won't solve the mystery behind the outbreak, so I guess the implication for this ending is that while Frank and some of the survivors are safe, the truth is completely lost. And depending on some of the story details that we'll come to, might only be safe for a couple of days before things get worse. But if you do get to Isabella on time, she'll tell you not to worry and that you should go to the helicopter without her. You'll know you've done it right if every zombie in the mall is now dead, so you can go ahead and wait for the helicopter. But again, you're gonna have to do some waiting.
Hey! 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 Hey!
I see you, buddy! I see you! Yeah! I'm on my way! Yeah! Yeah! Yeah, you did it! You did it! Yeah! Yeah!
But that's not the end, because you've now unlocked overtime mode. Isabella rescues you from the helipad single-handedly, which is surprising considering how shit she is to escort, and tells you that you're infected. The time until helicopter arrival is now replaced with a time until zombification timer.
You must have gotten yourself infected somehow.
Either way, Frank is slowly turning into a zombie, but with Isabella being a medical technician, she's able to create a drug which will slow down the rate of infection. The key term here being slow down. It won't cure you, but it'll keep you from turning into a zombie so long as you keep taking it. In later games, this drug would come to be called Zombrex and is a key part of the plot of those games. But that doesn't make the chemical makeup of it any less batshit. You have to go on a fetch quest for it to collect cold spray, a blender, a first aid kit, coffee filters, magnifying glass, a camping stove, photo developing solution, and a perfume bottle. This is starting to sound less like a medical cure and more like something you'd shoot up in a motorway services bathroom. Frank is understandably hesitant to shoot up this experimental recipe for speedballs, and laments that he'll essentially turn into a time bomb waiting to go off for the rest of his life. Which prompts Isabella to remember that her brother started an NPO designed to help war orphans find homes in the US before giving them doses of the experimental drug. What this means is that he essentially infected a load of kids, suppressed the infection long enough for them to get adopted, and sent them to various cities in the US to inevitably turn and create outbreaks in their areas. This is some MGS level shit and poses a global threat, but fuck all that, you've got more fetch quests to do. First, you have to turn on the backup generator in the clock tower, where Frank also discovers a tunnel leading out of the mall that's full of zombies. And second, you have to collect 10 queens, which involves running around the mall randomly and looking for zombies with a red spot on the back of their neck. This is kind of tedious, it does feel like the game padding itself out a bit towards the end, but it's ultimately not too terrible. Frank takes the shot and Isabel mentions that she has an idea for a theoretical pheromone that could repel zombies, allowing you to escape through the tunnel beneath the clock tower. And I'm kind of regretting insisting on playing the whole game wearing the Servbot helmet, since in this cutscene it genuinely fills the entire frame when it does an over-the-shoulder on Isabella, but at the same time I kind of like how stupid it is. From this point on, the game is a straight line to the finish where you have to push your way through the underground tunnels. This area kind of sucks since you'll be fighting with the game's hand-holding mechanic a lot and waiting for Isabella to open doors, as there was only enough pheromone to use it on her. So you'll have to do crowd control until she unlocks each gate, and you likely won't have any weapons beyond swinging rocks around. Once you do make your way through the tunnels though, you'll get to the game's final boss fight. Well, technically it's one stage of a boss fight. Compared to the other bosses in the game, this last one isn't too difficult, and the tank stage of it is just a turret section where you click on whatever the glowing part of the tank is, like it's Lost Planet. But eventually Not Krauser over here will ram into you with his Siri tank. That's not a joke, the tank legitimately takes voice commands. Either way, beating this guy the first time will send him into a Metal Gear monologue about how he commanded the Seneca Base a cleanup. I also don't think this guy's name is ever mentioned in game, and the only time you see him before this is in the short cutscene where Special Forces first enter the mall.
Humanity.
His name is Brock Mason, and for being a final boss of the game, you really don't know that much about him beyond the fact that he looks like he should be after the fucking Gorgonites. Otherwise, it just seems like he kind of came out of nowhere because the game needed a climactic boss fight and Carlito was already dead. The second stage of the fight is a little more fiddly and involves you getting into a fist fight on top of the tank. Attacking him normally is a surefire way to get choked out, and not in the fun way, and getting killed in this fight means that you have to do the tank bit all over again. So if you want to get past him, just spam flying kicks and hit him with the roundhouse when you land, and eventually you'll die and fall into the zombie crowd. Frank screams on top of the tank and the game ends. A post-credits scene explains that Frank and Isabella escaped and broke the news story, but that ultimately the story faded out of the public consciousness and it's still not clear whether Carlito's plan worked. Overall, this ending is kind of weak. On top of a boss fight with a main antagonist that only became the main antagonist about 5 minutes before the credits rolled, the rest of the action is all off screen. I have to wonder if time or money was running out, so they slapped together an ending to at least give you some closure, but that's just a guess. Maybe it would have been cool to see Frank and Isabella escape, only to find the rest of the country already covered in zombies, or to have Frank get detained after leaking the news story and end on him in a prison somewhere while the rest of the world loses its shit over finding out about the existence of zombies. I don't know. Ultimately, this is something the sequels will probably address, and from what I've played of 2, it seems like zombie outbreaks become a pretty regular thing in the world of Dead Rising. Finishing the game unlocks Overtime mode as a starting point, and also Infinity mode, which is a game mode designed to stomp your dick even harder than the base game. It's a game mode where you can't save, food and drink items don't respawn, Frank's health constantly ticks down by 1 box every minute, and survivors as well as psychopaths now attack you on sight, and killing them rewards you with food. It's hard, but at least it does allow you to kick the shit out of the people you've been friends with for the whole game, and after all those phone calls, Otis had it fucking coming. Dead Rising is weird. It's weird and unforgiving, and it goes out of its way to be tasteless and stupid, and that's why I love it. It's such a bizarre mix of ideas that it ends up creating its own strange genre of sandbox timekeeping, and it genuinely feels like it's been put together by people who cared about making it, even if it could do with a little polishing. Especially on the AI and the fact that its texturing is starting to look a little rough, so it can make the models look like weird plastic mannequins. But like the film that inspired it, it's scrappy. It's got a good core and enough fun, over-the-top violence to keep you interested, while also having enough dick-flattening difficulty to keep you frustrated enough to keep playing.
As with sonar, the big problem with detection is